Good afternoon, everyone. Myself is Suraj Agrawal, and I'm working as an associate director with Transprice. On behalf of Transprice, I welcome you all to today's webinar on transfer pricing adjustment. We have with us Amit Kaglani, who is working as senior manager with Transprice, and who will be taking us through today's topic. Meet is a chartered accountant from Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, as well as Institute of Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand. He has around 6 years of experience in transfer pricing across Big Fours of India, abroad, and has handled advisory compliances as well as litigation assignments across various sectors and industries. He has also contributed to the ICI guidance note on transfer pricing and ICI generals. So I hand over to Meet to take us through today's topic.
Thanks for the introduction, Suraj. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Before we proceed, I hope everyone is safe and sound at their end during these difficult times and is doing great otherwise as well. The agenda for today's discussion is comparability adjustments in transfer pricing. More specifically, the agenda includes why the need for comparability adjustments in the first place, a snapshot of the regulations as well as the OECD guidelines 2017, an in-depth discussion on certain adjustments, namely capacity utilization adjustment, working capital adjustment, market risk adjustment, depreciation adjustment, a quick glance on a couple of other adjustments as well, and of course the Q&A at the end. Coming to the question as to why the need for comparability adjustments in the first place. Now see, our elders must have always told us, or instead they actually still tell us, that keep the aspect of comparison out of your lives in order to stay happy. Do not compare yourself with that of others. But actually this is not very much true in the case of transfer pricing, because as a part of transfer pricing analysis, literally all we do is compare. As a part of transfer pricing analysis, what we really do is we compare the price which is charged in a tainted transaction or a controlled transaction, or specifically in the Indian context in an international or a specified domestic transaction, with the arm's length price. That is the price at which independent enterprises under similar economic and market conditions transact or would transact. That is all transfer pricing analysis is all about. Now, because we are comparing, because we are resorting to comparison, the need for comparability adjustments kicks in. This is because when we resort to external comparability analysis, that is, let's say when we resort to methods like external CUP or external TNMM, or for that matter, external RPM, here we have to use public databases, be it Indian or overseas. Now the sole challenge, or I would say one of the biggest challenges of this or of these databases, is that you're finding exact comparables is next to impossible. Those comparables could be good potential comparables, close enough, but not exact. And that is where comparability adjustments play a role. They rather enhance your exercise of comparison. They bring more meaning to your entire exercise. So the next slide is a quick snapshot of the Indian regulations, the US IRS regulations, as well as the OECD guidelines 2017. In India, of course, this rule 10B, which talks about comparability adjustments, and the literature with respect to comparability adjustments is also built inside the methods as well. So quickly, the Indian regulations say that reasonably accurate adjustments can be made to eliminate the material effects of such differences. And even the US IRS section 482 as well as the OECD guidelines 2017 talk on similar lines. They all bring out the fact that the aspect of comparability adjustments is absolutely essential if there are certain differences and those differences have a material impact on the price. So those differences need to be eliminated by way of undertaking comparability adjustments. Coming to our first adjustment, which we will be discussing in depth. This adjustment is capacity utilization adjustment. So here are certain quick pointers on your screens. Firstly, let us understand what is the argument which is adopted by the taxpayers in this case. The argument which is adopted is really a rational one and a pretty straightforward one as well, because this is more of a business argument. Every single business person faces this. And that argument is lower the capacity utilization, lower recovery of fixed costs, and therefore the operating margin is pressured. Because the operating margin is pressured, it is on the lower side and hence probably not in line with what the comparables earned during the period under consideration, if that is the case. Now, if you see, like we already discussed, this is a very relevant argument because at the end of the day, every single business person is required to incur certain fixed costs. Without incurring those fixed costs, a business cannot survive. Whereas fixed costs are essentially those costs which are not directly linked to the turnover. So imagine a situation that if the turnover is not sufficient enough to recover the fixed costs, ultimately what will happen? Ultimately, definitely the margin of the taxpayer would be pressured and therefore the margin would be on the lower side. This adjustment is relevant at the net operating level, of course. The reason being fixed costs are above the GP as well as below the GP as well. Above the GP are basically those fixed costs which are in the nature of direct manufacturing or direct service level fixed costs directly linked to the manufacturing activity or the service activity of the enterprise. And indirect fixed costs could be fixed costs in the nature of rent towards the premises, salaries to staff, or other general overheads. As a general rule, and this rule would be applicable to all the comparability adjustments which we would discuss going ahead as well. Always the margins of comparable companies should be adjusted. Although there have been decisions here, there have been judicial precedents which talk about the fact that if there is impossibility of performance and if adjusting the margins of comparable companies is not really possible, in that case, even the margins of the tested party can be adjusted. But more recently, all the decisions which have been coming in, those decisions specifically talk about the fact that margins of the comparable company should be adjusted. The mechanism in relation to how to conduct this particular adjustment was for the first time discussed with a numerical example in the case of Class India Private Limited. This was a very exhaustive ruling which threw certain really important and key principles, and it was the first ruling of its kind which actually gave a numerical example for conducting this adjustment. Obviously, the challenge here is, like we just discussed, that we are resorting to public databases. We are using public databases for our analysis, and not everything is available in the public domain. This is because the Indian companies prepare their financial statements under the Indian Companies Act as per the requirements of the Indian Companies Act. That is the statute which is applicable for financial reporting. There is no specific requirement in the statute to disclose data in relation to the capacity utilized of comparable companies. And that is why such disclosures are not made, because of which, obviously, we would not be in a position to find out data in relation to capacity utilized of comparable companies. Point number 6 talks about the remedy. Now, the remedy for this challenge was presented in Essentra India Private Limited. This was a decision which was given by the Honorable Bangalore Tribunal, and the Honorable Bangalore Tribunal pretty much accepted this argument that, okay, because the Indian Companies Act doesn't statutorily require the comparable companies to disclose data in relation to capacity utilized, then we have to think about something else. And the remedy which was suggested was Section 133, subsection 6 of the Act. Section 133 basically empowers the assessing officer to call for information. And subsection 6 empowers the assessing officer to call for information from persons other than the assessee. So the assessing officer can very well utilize these powers and call for information in relation to the capacity utilized from the comparables. And this data can be subsequently utilized for the purpose of undertaking this adjustment. So this was a very good remedy which was suggested here by the Honorable Bangalore Tribunal. However, here one of the important points to note is Section 133 subsection 6 of the Act empowers the assessing officer to exercise this, right? However, if the tested party, if the assessee wants to undertake this particular adjustment at the time of compliance, what is the mechanism with the assessee? Because obviously assessee cannot go back and ask for this data from its comparable companies, right? So that is something where there is no clarity yet, but we will discuss this subsequently as to what can the assessee do if the assessee intends to compute this adjustment in the transfer pricing study report itself. Of course, there are certain judicial precedents, and most of the judicial precedents here are in favor of the SSE. Those judicial precedents clearly talk about the fact that the Indian transfer pricing regulations, the regulations across the globe, as well as the OECD guidelines 2017, categorically talk about the fact that comparability adjustments can be undertaken in order to enhance the comparability analysis. And so these adjustments should be allowed and should be given to the taxpayer. So recently, all the judicial precedents which have come in, they are all in favor of the SSE. Lastly, one of the most important points here is that this kind of an adjustment is most relevant during times of COVID. Now, we all know that FY 2020 was the period where there was maximum impact of COVID observed. Of course, here there were numerous restrictions imposed by the central and state governments in terms of lockdowns, etc., because of which the factories were shut. However, the fixed costs were still being incurred, right? So, for example, let's say rent towards machinery, rent towards premises, even the salaries were being paid. So all the fixed costs were being incurred, but because these factories were shut, there was no production, because of which obviously the capacity was not being utilized, and there was no turnover, or maybe the turnover was on a lower side. Also, most of us by now have already concluded the benchmarking analysis for FY 2021, or maybe we would be in the verge of completion of this benchmarking analysis. So what we know for a fact is that data for FY 2021 for comparable companies is still not available in the public domain. So what we are really doing currently is we are comparing the results of the tested party for FY 2021 with FY 18-19 and FY 19-20 data of its comparable companies. Of course, in FY 18-19, there was no COVID at all. So FY 18-19 was not really impacted because of COVID. And FY 19-20 was impacted only to a limited extent, only probably Q4 of FY 19-20. Now imagine undertaking this comparison. FY 18-19, that is no COVID, FY 19-20, COVID impact only in Q4, and comparing this with the margin of the tested party for FY 2021, which is clearly COVID impacted margin. So this is definitely an absurd comparison. This is not an apple to apple comparison, and that is why undertaking a capacity utilization adjustment for FY 2021 is most relevant. Now let's understand the mechanism of this adjustment by using an example. Now this example was the example which was presented in the case of Class India Private Limited, which is point number 4 of this slide. Now consider the numbers flashing on your screens. Let's say there's tested party A. The fixed cost of this particular entity is rupees 100. There's a potential comparable to entity A also having a fixed cost of rupees 100. While the fixed costs appear to be in line, but look at the capacity which has been utilized by A and the capacity which has been utilized by its potential comparable B. Capacity utilization of A is just 25%, whereas capacity utilization of B is 50%, which means the capacity utilization of A is literally half of that of its comparable, or to put it the other way around, because the capacity utilization is half, the fixed cost intensity of A is twice as that of entity B. So what we really have to do here is we have to now double the fixed cost of B to make it comparable to that of A. So the simple formula here is 100 into capacity utilized of the comparable divided by capacity utilized of the tested party. So 100 into 50 divided by 25, which is nothing but 100 into 2, which is 200. Now, when the fixed cost of the comparable has been brought to 200, now it is comparable to the 100 incurred by entity A. And now, of course, the last step is we have to do a revised margin computation. We have to compute the margin of company B by substituting 200 in place of 100 as its fixed cost. So this numerical example was presented in the case of Class India Private Limited. Other judicial precedents, which, as already discussed, they talk about the Indian regulations, the global regulations, as well as the OECD guidelines, and they pretty well appreciate the arguments of the SSE that such kind of an adjustment should be granted. Those precedents are flashing on your screens. For the benefit of everyone, I'll quickly read them. eValue Serve SEZ, Caldwell and Salmon Communications, SAMI Labs Limited, TPR Auto Parts Manufacturing India Private Limited, Molex India Tooling Private Limited. Now coming back to the discussion which we had earlier in relation to section 133.6, we discussed that section 133.6 is basically one of the sections which can be utilized by the AO in order to gather information from the comparables of the SSE. But what is the remedy available in the hands of the assessee? That is the taxpayer, if the taxpayer really intends to do this adjustment at the time of compliance itself. See, there are industry reports available which throw up some light on the industry parameters. In these industry reports, there are certain data points in relation to average capacity utilized by the players operating in the industry. So this could be one of the good reference points which the SSE can use. The SSE can say that, let's say in the industry which I'm operating, approximately 65% was the capacity utilization of the players in this industry during this period under consideration. So 65%. The SSE could then benchmark against its own capacity utilized, and the SSE can say that every single comparable utilized its capacity to the extent of 65% and then substitute values as suggested in this particular example. So here, what is happening is both the things are being achieved. The SSE is still here adjusting the margin of its comparable company. For the capacity utilization percentage, the SSE is using a reference report, an industry report, which is very well arguable during the assessment proceedings as well. The SSE can very well say that this was the best reference point which the SSE managed to get. And that is why the SSE used this industry parameter, and the SSE can very well just substitute the other values as shown in this example and compute it. It's adjustment. Coming to the next adjustment, which is the working capital adjustment. Now we all know the meaning of working capital, right? Working capital is nothing but, you can say, net current assets or current assets minus current liabilities. To put it really simplistically, working capital is essentially the funds which an organization essentially uses in its day-to-day operations. And if the working capital cycle of the SSE or the tested party or any company for that matter is disturbed, there would be a huge impact on the operations of the tested party in terms of an inflation of the interest cost. So the simple rule is longer the working capital cycle, higher would be the interest cost of the enterprise, which would have a direct hit on the margin of the entity. This adjustment proceeds with a very simple logic. And that logic is that ideally, any enterprise would factor in the interest element attributable to its longer working capital cycle in its sales price. Now let us understand this statement with a very simple example. Let's say there is entity A, and entity A is not allowing any credit period to its customers. Entity A follows a simple policy that payment should be done either in advance or on the spot, without which entity A would not deliver. Right, so entity A has, you can say, has no debtor days because it is following a very simple policy. So the debtor days of entity A are 0. As against that, let's consider the comparable company of entity A, which is entity B. Entity B allows a credit period of 60 days to its customers. That means the debtor days of entity B are 60. Now, because entity B is giving an additional benefit to its customers, that is a benefit of 60 days, it is some sort of a financing service which entity B is giving to its customers. It is saying that you collect the goods today, you pay after 60 days. So obviously no service is without any remuneration, right? So the interest element of these 60 days, entity B would definitely factor in its sales price. And accordingly, that interest element would also be reflected in the margin of entity B. So probably the sales price of entity A in this case would be 100, whereas the sales price of entity B would be 105. That 5 is nothing but the additional interest component which entity B is recovering from its customers for the financing service which entity B is giving to its customers for 60 days. Another way to look at it is the concept of time value of money. We all know that money loses its value, correct? And in order to compensate for the loss of value, there is interest. So the argument again, which could be adopted here is 100 rupees received now would be equal to 105 received after 60 days. So this adjustment proceeds with this logic. Coming to the fourth point, again, adjustment can be made either to the sales price or the net margin of the comparable companies. However, what we have most commonly observed is that this kind of an adjustment is usually made to the net margin of the comparable companies because, of course, coming back to the same point, we are using the public domain here. So data in relation to the sales price per unit charged by comparable companies would never be available. Again, because Companies Act doesn't require the entities to give such kind of reporting disclosures. Mechanism and judicial precedents, we'll come to that. Let's consider an example here now. Example 1. So this kind of an example, this example basically is an example wherein adjustment is made to the sales price and not to the margin. Consider entity A and its comparable company, entity B. Both operate at a base sales price of 500. Entity A, however, charges 504 to its customers. Why? We will come to that. Operating expense is 450, operating profit 54, operating profit by total cost 12%. Debtor days 30, assume a rate of interest of 10%. Now, because entity A is allowing a credit period of 30 days to its customers, entity A is recovering the interest element of those 30 days in its sales price. So look at the computation of sales price for entity A. It is 500 plus 500 into 10% into 30 by 360, of course, because interest rate at 10% is 10% per annum. So this is how entity A works out its sales price to be 504. Let's come to its comparable. Similar numbers, base sales price 500, sales price charged 512.5. Again, we'll come back to that. Operating expenses, let's assume 430, profit 82.5, margin 19.19%. Debtors days 90, which means comparable B is allowing a credit period of 90 days to its customers. And therefore, it is recovering an interest element of 90 days in its sales price. So that is how 512.5 has been worked out. Now an adjustment here would mean, as we can see, that entity A has a credit period only of 30 days, whereas entity B is allowing a credit period of 90 days. So we have to compute the additional interest cost attributable to the differential period of 60 days, and we have to take it out from the sales price of company B comparable, and then we have to compute fresh margins. So when we compute the interest cost for 60 days and remove it from 512.5, obviously we come back to the level of entity A, which is 504. And then other numbers remaining the same. Operating expense is 430. Operating profit now comes down to 74. Margin comes to 17.21. So now what is really comparable, or what should be rather really compared, is 12% with 17.21% and not 12% with 19.19%. So like we just discussed, this has enhanced our entire comparability exercise. It has made this exercise more scientific. Coming to example 2, wherein now we would learn how to make a comparability adjustment to the margins directly and not to the sales price, because like we just discussed, information in relation to the sales price would not easily be available in the public domain. So here, let's assume that net working capital of tested party, which is entity A, is 5 lakhs, whereas that of its comparable is 10 lakhs. Both operate at a similar sales level, that is 50 lakhs each. Net working capital cycle as a percentage of sales of the tested party is 10%, as against that of its comparable, that is 20%. Margin of entity A 15%, whereas the margin of entity B is 17%. Now, step 1 is we have to first compute the difference between the working capital position of the tested party and that of its comparable company, which is nothing but 10% minus 20%, that is minus 10%. Assuming the interest rate to again be 10%, the adjustment here would be minus 10% into 10%, which is minus 1%. And this minus 1% is to be removed from the margin of the comparable company, that is 17%. So my answer comes to 16%. So what is really happening here is, at the end of the day, we are trying to adjust the margin of the comparable company because we are proceeding with an assumption that because the working capital blockage of the comparable company, like in this case, it is 20% as compared to 10% of the tested party. So because the working capital blockage of the comparable company is higher as compared to that of the tested party, the comparable company must have already acted as a prudent businessman and must have already factored in the interest element for its disturbed working capital cycle in its sales price. So already its sales price would have been on the higher side, and therefore its operating margin would have been on the higher side. So now, as a result of the adjustment, we need to bring it down, which is exactly what is happening. The margin has come down from 17% to minus 1%. Also, what is really important is, at the end of the day, the numbers and your results would come in later, but at least we should be able to figure out the direction of the adjustment conceptually. So the simple rule, like we just discussed, is if the working capital cycle of comparable is worse as compared to that of tested party, that comparable would have already inflated its sales price and would have already added the differential interest element in its sales price, and therefore the margin of the comparable would have already been on the higher side. So we have to take it out, and vice versa if the situation is reverse. Coming back to the judicial precedents, of course, again, these judicial precedents are in favor of the SSE, and this argument of the SSE is also very well accepted. So I'll just quickly read them. Quest Global Engineering Services Private Limited, Infineon Technologies India Private Limited, Herman Connected Services Corporation Private Limited, IDS Software Solutions India Private Limited, Lam Research India Private Limited. Interestingly, all these recent decisions have been given by the Honorable Bangalore Tribunal, which means probably the other tribunals have not much dealt with this issue. Coming to the next adjustment, which is the market risk adjustment. Now, this is one of those adjustments which is highly ambiguous and not much information in relation to this adjustment is available anywhere, either in the Indian jurisprudence or in any of the other superior jurisdictions as well, or in OECD guidelines. There's nothing which is available here domestically as well as internationally. Let's first understand what is the argument of the taxpayer here. The argument of the taxpayer is really simple, and this argument is majorly adopted in the case of captive entities. Captive entities are basically those entities which derive 100% of their revenue from their AEs. So the argument adopted here is that because the revenue stream of the captive entity is secured, it bears no market risk. That means the taxpayer is saying that I am not at all exposed to the vagaries of the market because at the end of the day, I am deriving 100% of my revenue from my AE. Fair enough. Now let's see what the department has to counter here. The department counters this by saying, even if you are not bearing market risk, but you are still exposed to single customer risk because you are deriving 100% of your revenue from your A, right? So you are exposed to a single customer risk, which is probably one of the biggest risks in the business. While the argument of the department finds some rationale here, in fact, it is a very good argument, but according to me, this argument is not a realistic argument. This is because a large M&E group would not run out of business overnight. Point number one. Point number two, a large M&E group would not go into any sort of a restructuring exercise overnight and cut off the revenue stream of the Indian taxpayer or the Indian captive entity overnight and give it to someone else. So this single customer risk, while from an argument perspective, it sounds good, but from a realistic perspective, from a reality perspective, it will hardly materialize because to do a restructuring exercise would trigger transfer pricing implications, other direct tax implications, regulatory implications, IDT implications, and plus, of course, even the stakeholders of the group would have to be taken care of. So restructuring is not everybody's cup of tea and it doesn't happen overnight. Wherein the argument which the taxpayer is taking is pretty much a realistic argument because when we are comparing the margins of the captives with the entities in the public domain, there are definitely full-fledged risk-bearing entities in the public domain, which are exposed to market risk. And because they are exposed to market risk, again, going by the logic of higher the risk, higher the reward, they must have already factored in the remuneration of that risk in their sales price. And that is why their margin is already on the higher side. So by making this adjustment, their margin needs to be adjusted, that is, it has to be brought down. So the argument of the taxpayer here finds more rational according to me. And this is something which our honorable tribunals have also accepted. Our honorable tribunals have also accepted this fact that what the taxpayer is saying is more realistic, whereas what the department is saying is sort of bookish, but does not really crystallize or materialize in reality. Coming to the third point, like already discussed, the adjustment proceeds with the general assumption that higher the risk, higher the reward. Fourth, the mechanism. As far as the mechanism are concerned, we are using the capital asset pricing model here, which would be discussed in the subsequent slide. The real problem of this adjustment is the challenges and the unrealistic assumptions of the CAPM model. Firstly, there are a lot of variables involved when we are computing this adjustment. The computation is complex. In order to find data in relation to these variables, there is a very big challenge, again, because of the limitations of the public domain. And there are certain unrealistic assumptions which the CAPM model adopts. People who have studied the CAPM model would know that CAPM model proceeds on assumptions like perfect market conditions, or every single investor in the market is rational, or all the entities in the market exhibit a uniform behavior, and the returns of the market or returns of a particular industry are evenly spread among all the players in the industry. These kind of assumptions would not actually, come to play if you look at a realistic scenario. Like, clearly in any industry, take any industry, there would be certain players who would dominate the industry, and then there would be certain players who are operating at the lower end. So expecting something that the returns would be evenly distributed in across all the players in the industry, and that all the investors in the industry or in the market behave rationally, I think that's pretty unrealistic. Judicial precedents, although there are quite a few judicial precedents in the SSE's favor, but the real problem is in none of those judicial precedents, the mechanism has been really discussed. Most of the judicial precedents or most of the honorable tribunals across the country have remanded the matter back to the file of the AO/TPO, saying that an expert opinion needs to be taken here to compute this adjustment. That means there is no clarity as to how this adjustment is to be computed. Because we are using the CAPM model here, CAPM model is a capital-based model. We will come to the formula in the subsequent slide, but it is a capital-based model. This adjustment makes more sense to a capital-based PLI. When I say a capital-based PLI, let's say return on capital employed, which is operating profit divided by total capital employed. Coming out with an answer using the CAPM model and then adjusting the OPTC of, let's say, a comparable company would generate absurd results, and that would be an incorrect exercise. So care must be taken that at the end of the day, the result of this model should be applied to a capital-based PLI and not a profit-based PLI. Now, these are the variables. So these are certain variables which one would need for the purpose of computing this adjustment. Point number one, there is a comparison between the WACC, that is the weighted average cost of capital of the tested party, with the WACC of its comparable companies. WACC stands for weighted average cost of capital, which is nothing but weighted average cost of equity plus weighted average cost of debt. The difference calculated above, that is weighted average cost of capital of the tested party minus the weighted average cost of capital of the comparable company, is then added or subtracted, as the case may be, to that of the return of capital employed of the comparable company. The formula of WACC is given in the third bullet, which is weighted average cost of equity plus weighted average cost of debt. Cost of equity, which is KE, this is something where CAPM comes into play. So cost of equity is risk-free return plus market return minus risk-free return into the beta coefficient. Now let's discuss every single parameter one by one. Risk-free return is the return on, let's say, government bonds or government securities, which is one of the most non-volatile instruments. Although, again, experts and economists have suggested that no security here is actually risk-free, even government bonds for that matter, because anything can happen to the government also overnight. We are living in uncertain times, and you never know what happens to the government overnight. And if that happens, your entire valuation for government bonds and the interest rate on that would change overnight. So the experts have suggested that, as a matter of fact, even this is not risk-free. But for the sake of example, let's treat government bonds as a risk-free instrument. Market return, that is RM, is the return which is attributable to a broad market-based index. Now, for example, it could be Sensex return, or it could be Nifty return, or it could be S&P 500 return. S&P 500 return is, by the way, the largest global index, right? So any of the broad market-based parameters could be substituted here in the case of RM. That would depend on the facts of the case. Minus RF we just discussed, into beta. Beta is a coefficient which takes care of the volatility aspect. So beta represents volatility of an individual company as that of the entire market. For example, if the beta coefficient of, let's say, a security is 1, which means that security moves perfectly in line with the market. So if the entire Sensex goes up by 1%, even that security will go up by 1%. If Sensex goes down by 1%, even that security will go down by 1%. So this is beta. KD is, of course, the cost of debt. That is the cost which an entity is bearing to raise debt funds. But because, like we all know, that interest is a tax deductible expense, cost of debt, which is nothing but interest, should always be computed post-tax. That is 1 minus the tax rate applicable to the enterprise. Too many numbers flashing on your screens, but if we go one by one, this is a very simple example. Let's consider this. Total capital of the tested party, 10 lakhs. The ratio of debt to equity is 6:4. That is, equity capital is 6 lakhs, whereas debt capital is 4 lakhs. So the weight of equity is 60%, which is nothing but 6 by 10. Weight of debt is 40%, which is 4 by 10. Risk-free return, currently it is around 6.15%. I've considered it to be 6%. RM, let's consider RM to be at 10%. Beta is 0.85. Interest on debt. So this enterprise, that is the tested party, is paying interest at the rate of 10% on its debt funds, and a tax rate of 30% is applicable to the enterprise. Using the CAPM model, which was just highlighted here, the KE, that is the cost of equity of the enterprise, works out to be 9.4%, whereas the cost of debt works out to be 7%, which is pretty straightforward. 10% into 1 minus tax rate, that is 10% into 70%, which is nothing but 7%. Right? Now let's go to the weighted average cost of capital computation. Weighted average cost of capital is weight of equity into cost of equity. So weight of equity is 6 by 10 into cost of equity is 9.4%, which is nothing but 0.094, plus weight of debt, that is 4 by 10 into cost of debt, that is 0.07. Answer comes to 0.0844, that is 8.44%. This is the weighted average cost of capital of the tested party. Using a similar approach, let's say the weighted average cost of capital of your comparable is 10.44%. So there is a clear difference of minus 2% here. So return on capital employed, let's say of P, which is again an assumed parameter calculated using the formula operating profit divided by capital employed. Let's say this number comes to 12%. So the revised rate of return on capital employed for B should be 10%. That is 12% minus the adjustment which we just computed, 2%. This means again we have applied a similar logic, because in this example the weighted average cost of capital is 10.44%. This comparable company is riskier in nature because its WACC is on the higher side. Because it is riskier in nature, its expected rate of return is also on the higher side. Otherwise, it will not be able to survive. Otherwise, it will not be able to conduct its business. So it has currently structured its operations in a way such that it generates sufficient return to cover its WACC. So its return on capital employed is on the higher side. And that is why to make it comparable to our tested party, we have to remove it. So again, the adjustment would be negative, which is something which is highlighted in bold below, that since the WACC of B is higher as compared to that of A, it bears a higher risk and therefore expects a higher reward. Therefore, before this adjustment, its ROCE is already on the higher side as compared to that of A. Accordingly, in order to establish parity, the difference should be reduced from the ROCE of B. So as we discussed earlier, conceptually, we should always be in a position to figure out the direction of the adjustment. Eventually, the adjustment will come out and it is nothing but a simple substitution of values in an equation. But what is more challenging is to really find out the variables in the equation. Coming to the judicial precedents which are in favor of the tested party, all these judicial precedents, like we discussed earlier, they've all spoken about the fact that in the regulations, there is a provision of this particular adjustment, and so it should definitely be granted. But at the end of the day, they have remanded back the matter to the AO stroke TPO, and they've asked both the sides, in fact, the taxpayer as well as the TPO, to take an expert opinion and come out with the adjustment. The precedents are NetApp India Private Limited, Yodlee Infotech Private Limited, IDS Software Solutions, Infineon Technologies, Analog Devices India Private Limited. Please note that these are just a few handpicked recent judgments. Obviously, there are quite a few judgments here, but not all of them have been highlighted in this slide. Coming to the last adjustment, which we would be discussing in depth. Of course, there are a couple of more adjustments, but the last in-depth adjustment which we would be discussing, that is the depreciation adjustment. Now, depreciation adjustment, again, it's a pretty straightforward adjustment here. Here, the taxpayer argues that depreciation should be taken out from the PLI of the taxpayer as well as that of its comparable companies owing to certain peculiar facts in that year. And those facts could be, let's say in that year, the taxpayer has made a substantial addition to its fixed assets in the beginning of the year itself, because of which its depreciation is shooting up. Or let's say during the year, the taxpayer has written off a major asset, so that is coming in its P&L. Or let's say the auditors of the taxpayer have required the taxpayer to write off a particular asset or to depreciate its assets at a higher value. There could be multiple reasons. So the taxpayer simply argues here that it is incurring some sort of an exceptional depreciation expenditure that should not be considered for its computation, and for the sake of parity, we will take it out from the PLI of the comparables as well. So from both the sides, depreciation should be removed. Again, a very well accepted argument. And the judicial precedents here, which have come in favor of the taxpayer, are Cahin Automotive Systems Private Limited, Messrs. Airzen Machines India Private Limited, Buckert Industries Private Limited, Amdocs Development Center India LLP, Vishay Components Private Limited. All these decisions have very well accepted the argument of the taxpayer and have given the benefit of this adjustment to the taxpayer. Moving on, these are last couple of adjustments which we would be discussing. These adjustments again proceed on certain similar logics which we just discussed. Country risk adjustment. So country risk adjustment is exactly in line with the market adjustment which we just discussed. This kind of an adjustment comes into play or stands more relevance when we are using foreign benchmarking studies. So consider an example that a foreign entity is providing certain low-end services to the Indian tested party. To the Indian entity, not the Indian tested party, because here obviously the least complex entity would be the foreign entity. And that is why ideally the foreign entity would be selected for the purpose of benchmarking this transaction. Now, let's say that foreign entity is in Singapore. So we would definitely use a regional search for the purpose of this exercise. We would use any of the foreign databases. It could be Thomson Reuters, or it could be Osiris for that matter, for the purpose of undertaking this regional search. Now, one limitation of the regional search is you would be doing an APAC search. In APAC, along with Singapore, there would be companies or there would be potential comparables from India, Pakistan, Thailand, Malaysia, or any of the other Asian countries you can think of. Definitely one would appreciate that the economic situation of, let's say, a company or a potential tested party in, let's say, Singapore would not be in line with your potential comparable based in, let's say, Sri Lanka or Pakistan. The economies are very different. The government policies are very different. Ease of doing business scale is very different. So one has to undertake a country risk adjustment here. It will proceed on a similar line. Here again, the adjustment would be computed using WACC. For the purpose of KE, again, we would have to use the CAPM model and we would have to come out with an answer, and we will have to add it or subtract it to the margin of the comparable, as already discussed earlier. The last adjustment for the day is accounting policies relation, any adjustment which is undertaken with respect to the accounting policies. Now, this kind of an adjustment again is a fact specific adjustment. So let's say the tested party is using normal I gap. The Ind AS based thresholds are not met, and that is why the tested party is using I gap for the purpose of preparation of its financial statements. So of course, in I gap, the reporting happens in a particular prescribed way. Vis-a-vis its comparable entities which are huge, their corresponding thresholds which are prescribed under Ind AS, those thresholds are met, and that is why they are using Ind AS. So they are rather statutorily required to use Ind AS. Now in Ind AS, there are certain specific disclosure requirements. One of them being OCI, that is other comprehensive income. Other comprehensive income is basically a head or a segment wherein certain items are reported net of taxes. These could be operating items as well. These could be non-operating items as well. They are reported net of taxes. Now, any financial statements which are prepared on the basis of IGAP cannot be really compared with financial statements prepared on the basis of Ind AS. So all these accounting policies adjustments have to be considered. So probably we just discussed OCI, right? So what we'll have to do is we have to test every single item which is embedded in the OCI component of the comparable, and we have to gross it up, and then we will have to recompute the margin of that particular comparable company. So we have to bring the margin of that particular comparable company to the IGAP level, and then only we have to compare. So this was again one of the adjustments in relation to accounting policies. With this, we have come to the end of our discussion. So we have discussed adjustments here, and now we'd be happy to look at the questions which have come in. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that now we can look at the questions and we can address them. Thank you so much for being this patient. Hello, Suraj, can we look at the questions, please?
Sure, Mit.
Yeah.
If anyone have any question, they can put it in the Q&A box and we can discuss the same.
I think as of now, no questions have come in. So we will probably wait for another 2-3 minutes or so, and then I think we can wind it up.
Yes. Sumit, we have one question on the view on the import duty adjustment.
Import duty adjustment is again, a very fact specific adjustment which we are talking about. So firstly, here we will have to evaluate the impact of the impact on the margin of the tested party as well as the comparable company when we are, undertaking this particular adjustment. So when we are talking about import duty, firstly, how is it actually being reflected in the financial statements? Is it going through the balance sheet route? Is it coming through the P&L route? Because at the end of the day, if it is not even coming through the P&L route, then obviously there will be no impact on my margin. Because at the end of the day, if you're paying some sort of an import duty and you are getting a benefit of that against any of your other liabilities, so there is no impact on the margin. So this is again one of the fact specific adjustments. But if I remember correctly, on the import duty front, there has been a judicial precedent which said that because this kind of a disclosure would again not be available in the financial statements of the comparable companies, here if there is an impact on the margin of the tested party, directly the margin of the tested party can be adjusted, assuming the fact that there was no such payout in the case of its comparable company. So in this case, because we have a judicial precedent, we can directly adjust the margin of the tested party.
Thank you. So we have one more question. Are tax authorities receptive to the various adjustment? What are the chances that an adjustment undertaken by a taxpayer will be accepted?
Lower level to put it very simplistically, lower level tax authorities are not very receptive to what the taxpayers do. Especially, let's say, if you compute an adjustment like a market risk adjustment using the CAPM, the taxpayer would directly disregard it and say that this is too complex, I'm not able to understand this, and so the tax authority would never give you the benefit of this adjustment. All these adjustments are most appreciated usually at the tribunal level. The lower level tax authorities would at max grant you working capital adjustment because because that is simplistic as compared to other complex adjustments in the nature of market risk or country risk adjustments. Any other questions, Suraj?
Just a second now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
How stringent are the documentation requirement while proving the risk adjustments?
In terms of the documentation, so at least in the transfer pricing documentation, the taxpayer at the time of compliance itself is required to bring out how is the margin of the taxpayer different or is not in line with that of the comparable companies. So the taxpayer would first be required to demonstrate with concrete evidence that actually there was an impact to the margin of the taxpayer because of maybe certain vagaries in the market or maybe the working capital position of the taxpayer vis-a-vis its comparable companies. So yes, definitely the taxpayer's documentation would have to be really strong. In the transfer pricing documentation, the taxpayer would be required to bring out all these aspects with concrete proof. Only then going down the line, the taxpayer would be in a position to argue and take these adjustments during assessments. Because we have also seen certain judicial precedents wherein the decision was gone against the taxpayer merely because the department took this stand that what the taxpayer is really doing is a post facto analysis. This is just an afterthought. If the taxpayer really wanted to claim this adjustment, the taxpayer should have done this at the time of making the documentation itself. The taxpayer should have proved this. But now, because the TP adjustment was made, the taxpayer is using an afterthought kind of a thing and coming up with this. So the transfer pricing documentation needs to be really strong for claiming any adjustment for that matter.
Very true. So the next question is, can we do two adjustment, say capacity utilization and depreciation adjustment for the same comparable set?
For the same comparable set, capacity utilization and depreciation adjustment, quite possible, because depreciation adjustment proceeds on an altogether different footing. Depreciation adjustment proceeds with the logic that during the year, the tested party or the taxpayer had an exceptional depreciation cost. So here we are directly taking out the impact of depreciation from the PLI. So we are taking depreciation out from the PLI of the taxpayer as well as that of comparable companies, whereas capacity utilization again proceeds with a different logic. The logic of capacity utilization adjustment is that my turnover was not sufficient enough to cover all my fixed costs. All fixed costs could be in the nature of direct as well as indirect. So this would include an adjustment towards rent also, salaries also, and everything. So both can happen very well because the logics are very different.
Okay. So why is cash not included in the working capital adjustment? I'm sorry if that was already discussed in this presentation. I probably missed it. Okay. The question is why cash is not included in the working capital adjustment?
Because that is, I mean, at the end of the day, that is what we are trying to find out. That is the answer to the equation and not the equation itself. Because your very meaning of net working capital cycle is the time required for you to convert your net current assets into cash. So it is basically, let's say, debtors. So the time required for you to convert your debtors into cash. In terms of inventory, the time required for you to convert your inventories into cash. Right. So when cash is your answer, you cannot make cash as a variable to your equation itself. That is why we do not consider cash while doing the adjustment.
Yes. In case if we forgot to undertake adjustment at the time of 3CB, can we undertake adjustment at the time of TP assessment? I mean, whether the TPOs would be open to the same.
So like we already discussed here, if you do not do anything during your documentation, then your case proceeds on a weaker footing, because then during assessments, the tax department would take a view that what you are now doing is clearly an afterthought. So if you fail to make an adjustment in your TP documentation and while you're doing your regular compliances, your case would then be on a weaker footing.
Correct. Okay. I think that's it, Mit. We don't have any additional questions.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Thanks for being so patient. And we can always connect offline as well, be it LinkedIn or on the ID which is flashing on your screen. Thanks a lot again and stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all the attendees. Thank you.